Alright, let's dive into something that's both fascinating and a bit mind-boggling. Did you know that wild deer are basically tiny methane factories roaming our forests? Yeah, it sounds bizarre, but stay with me. We're used to hearing about cows and their, gaseous contributions to climate change, but what about wild animals? A recent study just dropped some surprising numbers, and personally, I think it's a game changer for how we think about methane emissions. Here's the deal, deer, those graceful creatures we love to spot in the woods, are apparently releasing millions of tons of methane every year. But here's the kicker, it's not even close to what domesticated livestock produce. So, what's the big deal? Let's break it down. First off, methane is a big player in global warming. It's way more potent than carbon dioxide, and its levels have been skyrocketing. But figuring out where it's all coming from? That's the tricky part. Enter Teresa Yazbek and her team from the Max Planck Institute. They decided to crunch the numbers on wild ruminants, think deer, moose, llamas, and their methane output. What they found is that these animals collectively release about 3 million tons of methane annually. That's a lot, right? But here's where it gets interesting, over half of that comes from just 6 species of deer. 6. What makes this really interesting is that it shows how certain species can punch way above their weight in terms of environmental impact. Now, let's put this in perspective. Domesticated livestock, cows, sheep, and the like, emit around 600 million tons of methane every year. That's 38 times more than what wild ruminants produce. So, from my perspective, this study isn't saying wild deer are the new climate villains. Instead, it's highlighting just how massive the impact of human agriculture is. If you take a step back and think about it, we've essentially created a system where livestock are methane powerhouses, while wild animals are just, well, doing their thing in nature. This raises a deeper question, are we focusing too much on natural processes when the real problem is our own practices? One thing that immediately stands out is how this study challenges our assumptions. We often think of nature as pristine and untouched, but even wild animals have an environmental footprint. What many people don't realize is that methane emissions aren't just a human-caused issue, they're part of the natural world too. But here's the catch, the scale matters. Wild deer might be methane emitters, but their impact is minuscule compared to what we've created with industrial agriculture. This isn't to downplay their role, but it's a reminder that not all emissions are created equal. A detail I find fascinating is how the researchers calculated these numbers. They used global population estimates for wild ruminants and combined them with methane emission rates based on body mass and diet. It's a clever approach, but it also shows how complex these systems are. What this really suggests is that we need to be more nuanced in how we talk about methane sources. Blaming wild deer for climate change would be like blaming a candle for a forest fire, it's just not the same scale. So, where does this leave us? Personally, I think this study is a wake-up call to look at the bigger picture. Yes, wild animals contribute to methane emissions, but they're not the problem. The real issue is how we've industrialized food production and created a system that's unsustainable. If we're serious about tackling climate change, we need to focus on the heavy hitters, like livestock, while also appreciating the natural processes that have been around long before we started measuring them. What do you think? Are we giving wild animals too much credit for their methane emissions, or is this a reminder that everything in nature is connected? Let me know in the comments. And hey, next time you spot a deer in the woods, maybe give it a little nod, it's just living its life, one burp at a time.